The Mesh 6 from Vetroo has recently dropped, and they asked if they wanted me to take a look at their brand new case. Today I'll be going over the features of this case and sharing my thoughts on this high airflow tower. Before anything though, let's transfer my personal build into the case. With my PC transferred over into this case, let's start with the outside and work our way in. The side panel is tempered glass and is secured using 4 thumb screws. There is some rubber on the standoffs, but I wouldn't recommend trying to see how long the glass can stay without the screws. There's not much of a tint to the glass, which is fine, but what's not fine is like my m-atx 55, there's no black strip on each side so you can see the rivets and such where the glass meets the case. It's really not a huge deal, but it could be cleaned up a bit. At the front there's a large diamond shaped mesh grille, which is always welcome. The mesh is unfortunately not removable, so you'll have to remove the entire front panel, which also isn't very easy to get off when you need to clean off the dust. Beyond the front panel, you get a better look at the 4 fully addressable 120mm RGB fans, which I'll come back to in a second. On the top of the front panel, things are pretty standard. There's an RGB control button, one USB 3.0 port, USB 2.0, headphone and microphone jack, another USB 2.0 port, reset button, power and hard drive LEDs, and a big round power button. Just to the side of that is a magnetic dust filter covering the top fan and radiator mounts. The other side panel isn't glass, but it does have a bit of extra ventilation with another removable dust filter. At the back, there's the exhaust for the 2 other RGB fans, motherboard I/O cutout, 7 expansion slots, and the power supply cutout. There's also a magnetic dust filter for the power supply on the bottom. Taking a peek inside shows that there's quite a bit of space to work with. This is technically a mid-tower case still, but it's tall for what it is at about 21.7 inches. For cooling, there's of course the 6 pre-installed 120mm fans, but you can mount 2 more 120 or 140 fans at the top with up to a 280mm radiator, a 240 on the back. While there isn't any indication of putting a radiator in the front, you could probably squeeze at least a 240. The shroud for the power supply and hard drives can also have up to 2 120s mounted, and I see some more mounting holes for a fan directly above the power supply, so that's also a possibility. Graphics cards up to 350mm in length can be installed, and CPU coolers up to 165mm tall can be installed into this case. For your storage needs, there's 5 drive mounts, 2 of which can support 3.5-inch drives, and all 5 can house a 2.5-inch drive. The SSD mounts next to the motherboard are unfortunately basically useless, as even though I could route both the data and power cables under the motherboard, unless you have a smaller micro-ATX or an m-atx board, there's not enough slack to be able to put a straight data cable. If you had a reverse 90-degree SATA data cable and an unsleeved power cable, you'd barely get past this issue. I actually had to just toss my SSD under the 2 hard drives, as there was not much else I could do. Speaking of motherboard sizes, you can mount up to a standard ATX board, but no e-ATX support. Though if you really needed to, I think there's enough room for a longer board, but it might touch the incline for the SSD mount, so I'd stick with the regular ATX board. Removing the side panel on the other side of the case reveals a wiry mess. There's an included RGB and fan hub combo, and the RGB sync works fine, but the fans are what really disappointed me. You aren't given the option to control the fans at all. They run at full speed all the time, 7 days a week. The fans look great, and despite being of cheaper quality, they can move a decent amount of air for what they are. Even when I connected 4 of the 6 fans, they are still quite noisy. I have 2 spinning drives in my system and that's tolerable, but 2 fans aren't. The RGB controller works well for what it is, but I wish that the fans could be controlled. So, how about the building experience? There's nothing special really going on here, and installing everything was relatively simple. I went back to using my TX750 to see if we could handle the excess cabling, and I was able to hide most of the cables in the basement. The fan and RGB controller were a tad on the messy side, but it was manageable. There's ample space for cable management, but the routing holes are a bit strange. There are some routing holes, but unless you have a mini ITX board, they're pretty useless, but I did use them for routing my SATA cables. The case is extra tall, and other than the extra fan and added space for a thicker top radiator setup, the space isn't being used to its fullest. The rear fan cables, cables for the radiator fans, and CPU power are all being crammed into one spot. Even if I did clean up the cabling, there's plenty of room to be had in the extra space above the motherboard. But there's not, and I feel that the extra space was wasted. And on the subject of cable management, why no cable grommets? The funny thing is that on the Amazon listing, there's a picture of the case with a few grommets in place, but there's none present here. In terms of looks, the case looks fine. I'm pretty picky on how things look, but from a case design perspective, it's acceptable. But there's some smaller things that maybe some of you won't really care about, but stood out to me. Let me give an example. First off, this is a case that has been used before, just with some minor differences, and sold under a different model name. That's not an issue in the slightest. My issue is that some things were changed that probably shouldn't have been. The front mesh panel is definitely welcome, and that's all I have to say about that. The top I/O and buttons look ugly in my opinion, which might seem like a very picky thing to mention, but from a case design perspective it really is. Everything is stretched out unnecessarily, and it doesn't need to be. I like the look of the original top I/O from the older iterations of this case. Some are better than others, and again, this is a really small thing to be complaining about, but it just feels cramped. That's simply my opinion though, so if you don't mind the look of it, that's totally fine. The case is built really well overall, but I personally feel that there's a lot left to be desired. For $100, you get a mid-tier case with RGB fans that run at 100%, functional yet lacking routing holes for cable management, drive mounts that don't really serve much purpose, and various different design choices that make the case look cheap. It's an okay case for what it is, but especially with that steep price, it's hard for me to recommend it. There are 6 beautiful RGB fans, but even RGB can't make up for everything else. If some fan splitters were used for every pair of fans, or some type of fan controller was integrated, either into the case or via a motherboard connector, that'll help reduce noise. The price is fair given what 6 RGB fans would usually set you back, but it seems that there's been more dedication to the fans rather than the case itself. If this case included fewer fans that could be controlled, I would be more content and maybe even recommend it. But given what else is available in the market, it's a tough sell for me personally. But if you can overlook these shortcomings and don't mind the noise, the Vetroo Mesh 6 offers solid build quality with ample airflow and plenty of cooling options. If you want to take a look at the case for yourself, I'll put buying links in the video description. Thanks again to Vetroo for sending me this case to review. I'm not trying to hate on them for this case, but I can't try and lie about what needs to be fixed. Hopefully they can take some of my critiques to improve upon this case in the future. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section, and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, but if not, you know where to go. While you're there, consider subscribing to the channel and enable notifications for more quality tech videos. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you later.